Good evening, welcome everybody to the November 2018 edition of the Space Association, the monthly meeting. Glad to have you all on board this evening. My name is Peter, I'm the President of the Space Association, for those of you who haven't met me before. What's happening? Here we go. So welcome. So we've got a big night on tonight, and the main man's just here. Round of applause. Angelo, speech.
Have I missed something?
Yeah, we've been talking about it for the last 20 minutes. Come on. No, Angelo will actually be doing a presentation later on this evening. Yes, thank you. So yes, welcome everybody. And this is just an early version of the lunar rover vehicle. They stripped it down a bit to get up on the rocket. It was a bit of a heavier version, that one they had. Bedford truck. Anyway, we'll talk about that soon. Tonight we've got an exciting packed night again. Always more stuff than we can fit in, but it'll roughly go like this if we can stay on time. We're going to have a bit of a talk about what we're doing in the association, what's happening around the association, and our next event, which is the final event for the year, the annual trivia night. So we'll give you details on that. Then we've got the feature presentation with me on our Footsteps to the Moon series. Tonight we're going to look at training for the moon, so it's fascinating stuff for us space geeks. And then we're going to swing over to Igor Rozenberg, who's going to give us the inside story on that recent abort of the Soyuz launch, which we all saw. Igor's got his Russian contacts onto it, and Vladimir Putin has given input as well, so he'll give us that detail. You'll have to sign a non-disclosure agreement before you leave, though, with that. And then we're going to have a quick break just to say hello, stretch your legs, go to the toilet, have a cup of tea. The urn is going to be arriving soon. Please feel free to have a nibble on some of the food over there. It's all part of what we do here. And then we're going to have our first segment of Space News with Angelo and Michael. And then part two will be with Rennie down the front here in the mosh pit. And then we'll be finishing night at 9 p.m. around that time. Before I forget, because I always do, there is a sheet at the front here. If you're not on a mailing list, if you're first night here or you haven't disclosed your intentions, just put your name in there and we'll keep you up to date with our events and things that are happening. So just a couple of things around the place. ScienceWorks over at Spotswood have got this thing currently running, or just started actually, called Museum of the Moon. It opens, starts in December. So they've got this big moon sphere, which could be quite interesting to see, and then they've got a multimedia presentation around it. So, and then they've got the virtual reality on the moon presentation starting from the 17th, which I believe you can get involved. I think for those of us that went along to the First Man premiere, they had these VR goggles and you could walk around on the moon. I think that's part of that, so a bit of fun. So over at ScienceWorks. We spoke about it a little while ago. This book came out just very recently, called about Honeysuckle Creek and Australia's role in the moon program, in the landing and the space program. It's a great read. I really enjoyed it, and we're actually going to be giving it away to member. So it'll be in the next couple of weeks. We'll announce it. It's for those people who are paid up members. So if anyone has hesitated, let their membership lapse, or is thinking about joining, hey, it's a good time. And I'm on Shopping Channel later tonight as well, by the way. Another thing, the Final Journey of Saturn V is another book that's recently come out. We're going to have a giveaway on that one as well. Once again, we'll do it via the membership database. So that's an interesting read. It's about the last 3 Saturn V rockets that were kind of left over at the end of the program, and one at Kennedy Space Centre was sitting out in the Florida weather for many years, and it's a story of how they restored it and brought it back to life, and now it's in the visitors building over there, nicely restored is the word. All right, I mentioned a moment ago, so our final meeting for this year will be December 17. It's a Monday night, and it's going to be our 6th, I can't believe it's 6th annual trivia night. Please, come in. Round of applause. No, it's okay. So these trivia nights are loads of fun, and I've been working with Andrew Rennie on some of the questions, and it's not going to be pure space. It's going to be a lot of fun, interesting things. So yeah, come along. It's free, and we're also going to be doing. It'll coincide. The December meeting will coincide with the Apollo 8 mission. Although the mission actually takes place a little bit after our meeting, but in real time. But we're going to, for the purposes of logistics, we're going to pretend it's happening during the meeting. Now, where is it going to be? It's going to be at the Imperial Hotel in the city. Round of applause. Here's Igor. Thank you. All right, I better stop that. So that's at number 8 Burke Street in the city. It's right opposite the Parliament House. And the room will be, it's called the Parliament Room, which is, you go into the entrance of Spring Street and go upstairs to the right, and it's up at the top there. They'll direct you to the location there. And once again, it overlooks Parliament House, so it's quite a beautiful location. So on the night, I just have to run through a few logistics because we're going to have the trivia night, but we're going to also have the opportunity to have dinner and drinks and things. So if we can try to all follow this, we'll send an email out. Well, actually, I've already sent an email out. If you can get there at 6:30 or before, great. We're going to have some finger food and things like that. What we'd like you to do is to actually, in the email we sent out, we attached a PDF file, which is the menu. If you can decide what you kind of want to eat, and then place an order before 7 o'clock if we could, that will allow the staff to get everything organised as early as possible, and then we'll have those meals delivered later on. So what you need to do is you need to form a team, grab a table. I think there'll be 6 tables. So depending on how many people we have, we're thinking 4 or 5 per table. And once again, form a team with someone you've never met before. It's all about socialising and doing something fun. So then we'll do an introduction. 7:30 will be the first round. Then we'll hopefully have everyone will place their orders, and dinner will be served at 8 p.m. Once again, you have to pay for your own meals. It's not supplied by the association. We do supply some finger food, that's all. But the rest of it's up to you. And one thing we'd like to do is to try and keep tabs of that total spend. So if you do get a receipt on the night, if you could stick it in a box or give it to me or somebody, we're just trying to keep track. The way the system works down there is they have a minimum spend for the night. If we meet or exceed that spend, we don't have to pay any extra for the venue. If we don't meet that, the association will have to tip in. So if all of you could either pass that receipt on to me, or Michael might have a box there, just throw it in, just so we can have a running total. Then we're going to have a speaker presentation. We're talking about Apollo 8, as I mentioned. Then dessert will be served, and then we go into round 2, and then we have the results. I don't know if there's valuable prizes. There might be some prizes. We'll see how we go. And then we're going to finish up at about 10 p.m. Tip you out in the street, or you can stay there and keep on doing whatever you're doing. And that's going to be the night. As I say, we've done this. This will be the 6th time. Each time it's been a load of fun, and you learn things that you never thought you ever would learn, or you never needed to know about space. So once again, Imperial Hotel, December 17, and once again we'll be sending that menu through to you. All right. So having said all that, once again, we do rely on memberships to fund everything that we do here. None of us. Well, I've had a big salary cut on my presidential salary, so it's way down. So I'm going to have to tip in and get people to join up. Everyone's volunteers here. Everything we do, the venue, the food, all these things are paid for. Well, the venue, fortunately, we don't pay for. We'd like to thank our hosts, the RMIT Space Technology Association. They graciously host us here. But everything else we do, the radio show we do, etc., is all funded by membership. So we'd love you to join. Tim has just walked in. He's over there with the blue shirt and the stunning hairdo, just like mine. So see him about memberships. It's completely wind resistant and aerodynamic, which is something I like. All right. Tonight. Oh, okay. We can have a clicker change, everybody. So you can tell me what's going on here in this picture. Well, I'll tell you. This is an early... that's your thing. This is Frank Borman and Jim Lovell doing astronomical training. This is a mock-up of the sort of windows of their Gemini spacecraft, and they're sort of pointing out and locating different star locations and things to help with their on-orbit navigation. So apparently this happened a bit. I thought it was a pretty cool picture. I think it's Griffith Observatory, I think it was. Hey, how are you? Everyone's standing up tonight. That's lovely to see you. Fantastic. All right. Anyone got any questions about the trivia night? Yes. Yes and yes, unless otherwise notified. All right, which means, once again, our meetings are the fourth Monday of the month, which makes January... Could you look it up for me? 28th. Thank you. Right, all right. It does coincide with the Australia Day holiday, so we might do something about that. I'm not sure. All right, so thank you for that. On to our feature for the night, one of the features of the night. As people may or may not be aware, 50 years ago, in July of next year, July 19, will be the 50th anniversary of the first landing on the moon landing by Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong. So in the lead up to that, we've been doing this monthly sort of look at what was happening in the month 50 years ago. So tonight we're going to be looking at November 1968. Can't believe it. And our series is called Footsteps to the Moon, and it's the countdown to Apollo 11. And this picture, it was in a book that I had when I was 8, and I always thought he looked really miserable, like lugging around whatever he was doing. I don't know. Anyway, that picture really struck me. Looks like he's got his mum's movie camera there too. All right, so once again, the series is basically a series of monthly reports about the lead up to the moon landing, and we'll be culminating in the 50th anniversary of July of next year. So yeah, the association are working on some events to coincide with that here in Melbourne. There is a big event happening up in Canberra organised by some of the people that were involved in the in Honeysuckle Creek and the original mission back there. They said they were going to do the last one at the 40th anniversary because they were all getting too damn old, and now they're cycling up to do it again. So it's really fantastic. So if you're not going to be in Canberra, we'll have something here for you in Melbourne. All right. So in addition to the focus on the Apollo missions and the various activities happening around that, we're going to be looking at some of the parallel efforts by the Soviet Union, which kind of happened a lot in secret, and we'll be talking about that. A lot more information has come out post-Cold War and it's about able to understand what they were doing. We'll also be looking at the Australian contributions to Apollo, including Honeysuckle Creek, Parkes. There's an Australian scientist who did a dust experiment that flew on a number of the missions. He lives in Perth still, and he's very keen to be involved, so we're trying to work out how we're going to get that happening. So the USSR, the Soviet thing, is going to be in February with Igor and Mark Hillier. We've got a TBC to be confirmed in April for the Australian side of it, and also we're going to be looking at the decision to go to the moon using the lunar orbit rendezvous architecture that they eventually went with. So it's quite a fascinating story, and Rennie is going to be looking at that one for us. But once again, we're going to be looking back at November and the build-up. It's only next month, everybody. You're getting excited? Apollo 8's next month. I wonder how it'll work. Now, I know it's been stressful the last couple of times we've done this. This is where we do the time travel, we go back 50 years. Last time there was a few people who were nauseous and had problems with the G-forces and things like that. So once again, do strap in. It is an exhausting but exhilarating process.
Time machine, what do you mean last time? I mean next time?
Well, yes, last time and next time. So stand by. We made it. November 26, 1968. Give yourself a hand of applause. You made it. Fantastic. All right. Now, let's put ourselves in 1968, and we have to thank our sponsor from 1968. I've got to play this. It's a contractual obligation.
This is the key. The King with soft smoke. Silver King opens the door to a new kind of pleasure. Silver King with soft smoke. Smooth, mild, much more satisfying. Come alive with Silver King. Silver King opens the door to a new kind of pleasure. Silver King. Soft smoke.
Why did I ever give up smoking? I don't know. All right, so what was happening in the world in 1968? Well, there was quite an eventful thing that happened on TV. It was the first interracial kiss on commercial US television between Uhura and Kirk. A Pan Am flight in Puerto Rico was hijacked, and it went off to Cuba and stayed there. It was escorted by a US fighter. Yale University announced it would admit women students for the first time. Things have never been the same since. And in Vietnam, of course, the Vietnam War was raging, and there was a bunch of 374 civilians in Laos were killed in a US attack. It was a pretty horrible time, and they were trying to get the peace talks happening, and so the US pressured the South Vietnamese president to reverse their decision not to participate in peace talks. So eventually that happened. Tricky Dick Nixon won the election. Ah, the good old days. When you had a president that could string two words together. Spiro, yeah. Yeah. Hey, this is a G-Rad show. It sounds like it, yeah. Ansett was renamed, Ansett ANA was renamed Ansett. Look at that T-Jet. My first ever flight was in one of those. I sat down right down the back, right next to the engine too. God. Anyway, Rain Level win the Melbourne Cup just recently, and Penelope Plummer, I don't know if it happened to her, won the Miss World. So I don't know whatever happened to her. Yes. The Beatles were on topic still in the US, in Australia, I should say. Mary Hopkins was second. Look at those. Who's got those singles? With the help of my friend Joe Cocker, he did a good job of that. And the Beatles did release their White Album. And they were just been released, yeah. And they were breaking the law even then. It's shocking. All right, let's look at the space stuff. Okay, so in November, the Apollo 11 third stage was at the static test stand in Sacramento, about to be undergoing testing. The November 3, the Apollo 8 prime crew were in the centrifuge gondola at the Manned Space Flight Centre, not the Johnson Space Flight Centre. And you can see Bill Anders climbing out of there. November 8. Okay, the reason I'm doing this is I just want to impress, and I think I've tried to relate in the last couple of meetings, the amazing number of things that were happening quickly and concurrently, like the decision-making process. Have a look at this. In November 8, they set up a special task group to review all of the hardware and all the processes happening around Apollo 8, where they're going to be ready. November 10, they reviewed the success of Apollo 7 and exceeded all expectations, and they basically said, yep, we can go for this, we can do it. So then different people gave reports on the launch vehicles, the spacecraft status, the flight plan, the readiness of KSC to support the launch, etc. So then Philip said he would recommend to the Management Council the next day the Apollo 8 would go to the moon. So these are the number of the main decision makers here. Sam Phillips, Director of the Apollo program. November 11 gives the go-ahead. So they'd put it out there and they were going to go for it. So they put that in with the blessings of all the different decision makers. November 12, the very next day, they make the public announcement. And a lot of this was spurred on by a lot of the activities that they were monitoring on the Soviet side. They'd made the Zond 5 unpiloted circumlunar navigation of the moon, and the cosmonauts on Soyuz 3 rendezvousing, etc. Zond 6, a loop around the moon, etc. So there was a lot happening, and they really didn't know how far they were away from gazumping the Americans. So it was really on. November 14, Jim Irwin, who later flew to the moon and walked on the moon on Apollo 15, along with Jerry Gibbons, was performing a vacuum chamber test in the lunar module test article. You can see him sitting there entertaining himself. Once again, designed to simulate a mission, the descent, the landing, and the stay on the moon, and the launch and the ascent back. November 16, the Apollo 8 crew conducted a press conference and spent an hour talking about the mission, what they were going to do, answering questions, etc., etc. So they laid out the mission plan, how it was all going to pan out, what they were going to be doing. By the way, as Andrew is fond of saying, this correlation or scale is nowhere near what really is between the moon, the Earth and the moon. Like the moon would be the next building or next few rooms away. Frank Borman, using some state-of-the-art audio-visual aids, was explaining what was going to happen in the mission. At the same time, once again, the Apollo 11 spacecraft was at Downey being fitted out for its mission, hopefully in July. So it looks pretty empty at that stage, but it's being built and constructed. November 20, Fred Hayes, the lunar module backup pilot for Apollo 8, was suiting up for egress tests at 39A. So at that stage, Armstrong, Aldrin and Hayes were the backup crew for Apollo 8. Collins was still undergoing or recovering from his surgery he had to his neck, and so he wasn't confirmed to be the backup for Apollo 8 or indeed the prime crew for 11 at this stage. Once again, this is 1968 November we're talking about. The lunar module for Apollo 9, the first flight of a manned lunar module, was at KSC being readied and having its landing gear fitted. So that was kind of the context of what was happening in Apollo in November, getting ready for the mission next month of Apollo 8. So because there was no mission flying this month, November, we thought we'd take a look at the various training techniques and systems that they used to train the astronauts. People might recognise this bloke. We'll talk about him later. So basically what they did in practice, they practiced every second of the mission. From mundane things like planting the flag to all of the important things like launching, landing, rendezvousing, etc., etc. They used multiple different techniques and different ways of trying to replicate different parts of the mission, including post-mission if they landed out in the water, in the desert, in the jungle, etc., etc. And we'll look at all of that. So this particular one was the fun part of the presentation about training. This was an Iron Cross simulator back from the late 50s. And basically it was a way of trying to train the operator to stabilise and move. So you can see the thruster here moving on the side. This happened to be just a jet sitting in the back there. I don't know why that's there, but anyway. Fascinating. So this is Langley. They've got a couple of fire extinguishers here, which looks high-tech as well, so that's good. All right, so training for the moon. So I'm going to go through some of the different things. So they had indoor moonscapes. So they would spend a lot of time in facilities basically working on the sequence of the moonwalk, getting in and out, equipment deployment, what they were going to do, how they're going to photograph it, who's going to do what, how they're going to work together, what things they would do separately and individually. That was an interesting one. This is Apollo 12, obviously helping him get up from falling over, I assume, just to see how that would work. Now, once again, this is in 1G, so obviously it's not fully replicating the moonwalk experience, and they're basically wearing moon suits, so they would have been pretty heavy to be walking around with as opposed to the 1.6 gravity. Yeah, so they spent a lot of time doing that. This is interesting. I saw this is like 1 week before the launch of Apollo 11. This is Neil going through some last-minute processes and steps of his eventual step down the ladder and on the moon. So I'm not sure whether he's wearing his flight suit there. Maybe he was wearing his actual flight suit to make sure it was going to be able to step up and step down. I guess it's an important part of the mission. 6 degrees freedom simulator. This was a contraption that strapped to their backpacks in this case and allowed them to take 5/6 of their weight off of them, so they could practice that bouncing and walking around. Obviously carrying some equipment, but also going up and down a slope, except there's Ed Mitchell here on the right-hand side. I thought that was quite fascinating. In fact, I have to admit, I used to replicate moonwalking myself when I was little. I used to go to the pool, and if you go to a swimming pool and go to about chest deep in water, you can just about replicate that bouncing up there. You don't quite get the same movement forward, but try it next time if you've got a swimming pool. Other training vehicles, the Lunar Landing Research Vehicle. This was basically a vehicle designed by Bell Aerosystems, and it used a jet engine with a thrust pointing directly down. And what they do is they get up to a certain height, 1,500 feet, and then throttle back and basically use the thrusters on board to simulate a moon landing. And they said it was very valuable. In fact, I've got a really nice video here that I thought you might like to see.
Moon and returning it safely to the Earth.
Soon after President Kennedy's call to go to the moon in 1961, a number of researchers began to think about the various aspects of a lunar flight. NASA's Flight Research Center at Edwards proposed a free flight lunar landing simulator program. The research test vehicle was intended to investigate the inherent problems of lunar descents where there is no drag and weight is only 1/6 of Earth. The proposed technique for simulating the lunar gravity installed a jet engine underneath or within the machine on gimbals, so the thrust was always vertically upward. The engine thrust would then be adjusted so that the craft's net weight, that is its gross weight minus the engine thrust, would equal its lunar equivalent. The force required to lift the net weight would be provided by throttleable rockets. The first flight of the LLRV in October of '64 was flown by Joe Walker. first liftoff was what you might call tentative. The second was considerably smoother. During the following year, Joe Walker and Don Malik flew about 150 development flights, expanding the flight envelope and investigating the adequacy of the design and the systems. An advanced version of the LLRV, the Lunar Landing Training Vehicle, or LLTV, proved to be an excellent simulator and was highly regarded by the Apollo lunar module crews as necessary to lunar landing preparation. Typically, the pilot took off with the gimbals locked, flew out to the inner marker, which in this case was about 400 to 500 feet altitude, about a quarter of a mile from the intended touchdown spot. Arriving at the IP, he began a descent toward the target, switched into the lunar simulation mode, energized the lift rockets, and practiced the lunar landing. I was most fortunate to be involved throughout the entire lunar flying development. I had the pleasure of flying every one of the machines, the LLRF, the ground-based simulators, the LLRV, the LLTV, the lunar module, and even the Weber ejection seat, the last not by choice. NASA management was forever worried about the reliability and safety of these machines and continually wanted to shut them down. But the pilots insisted they were vital to lunar landing preparation, and they prevailed.
Anyway, I thought you'd like that. Did I leave my... So, a less dangerous but somewhat similar way of trying to train for the landing was this Lunar Landing Research Facility. Basically, this system used cables and a frame to sort of take that 5/6 of the weight of the vehicle off, and actually use engines. It had jet engines to use and thrust up and down to be able to take off and land. And once again, it used thrusters as well. So that was quite a fascinating device as well. I don't remember if this has got audio. We'll see. No, it doesn't. So you can see it sits on this big frame, and the spacecraft, or the vehicle, is on those cables. And once again, there's a jet engine underneath it, which increases or decreases the thrust and allows it to raise or lower according to the pilot's inputs. It also has thrusters to be able to turn and go forward, etc. So it's quite a good, effective tool in conjunction with the LLTV. This facility at Langley is still there, and they still use it to this day. They use it for dropping capsules, they use it for the Orion, they use it for flying planes into simulated crashes, etc. And it's proved its worth over the years. You can see the thrust on the ground there. Hey. Skip to the next one because it's There's another video, but the reason I'm showing this is very specific. So I believe Albean was flying this. And the reason I'm showing this, it's similar to what we saw before. It's an earlier version of the thing. But you'll notice what happens as it gets closer to the ground. They create a surface with craters and things like that to try to simulate everything. But apparently, this particular time, they'd had a lot of rain the night before. And you can see the mist and things coming up. Now, the reason I'm mentioning this is that I read an interview with one of the engineers who spoke to Albean afterwards, and he sort of apologised for the mist and the rain. He said after the mission, when he got back to Earth, he said that training with the water coming up was almost exactly the same as what we experienced on the moon when all the dust came up. So it was actually really good training. Basically, they couldn't see really anything. So it's fascinating. Okay, so they had a reduced gravity walking simulator as well. And this was strung from the Langley facility, and they basically, this wasn't really used for training astronauts, it was more to testing the ability for astronauts, for people to be able to walk on the moon. So they basically hung them sideways, and at a certain angle that allowed them to sort of swing out to simulate the 1/6 gravity. It would be quite an exhausting thing to go, but they had all different straps and things to help them. So yeah, they persisted with this. This is the first one was in 63, and this is 68. So once again, and they even started this one here. I think they've got a jetpack on the back, and they were actually looking at the feasibility of using jetpacks to get around the moon or in space. So by basically using the thrust of the jetpack. So there's videos around, you can see all that sort of stuff. So it's fascinating. So they also had to train for the possible. Well, not possible, they intended to land on the water. So they had to do training. They wouldn't, no point in just getting at the end of the mission and suddenly landing in water and working out what to do. So they had to try and replicate and test and train, practice everything that they did. So this picture on the left is actually of the Apollo 1 crew, I believe. Yeah, Apollo 1 practicing in a swimming pool. Then Apollo 9 in the Gulf of Mexico. And then at the Manned Spacecraft Centre, they even practice getting out of the space capsule if it had inverted and there was no way around to get them out. They did have a system on the spacecraft where they inflated balloons. If the spacecraft landed in, I think it's called Stable 2, they gave that name to the spacecraft. If they couldn't get it round and the airbags didn't inflate it to right the spacecraft, and there was no rescue ship around, what are they going to do? So they had to practice the possibility of getting out through the top of the spacecraft. So once again, trying to think of every possible contingency in case they had problems. So lunar sample collection. They did a lot of this outdoor practice, digging trenches, picking up samples, working together. Because they're in the spacesuit, it's not like you can just walk down and put things in your pocket and go there. You've got to work as a team. So they practiced working as a team, documenting samples, because documenting each sample was very important as well. You could pick up a rock and just throw it in a bag, but where was it sitting? What part of the BVO was it? What orientation was it to the sun? What was it relating to as far as soil and things like that? So they documented every sample. So they, part of the contingency samples, I think, they made sure that they tried to do that. They also had a drill in later missions. They had a drill into the ground, so they were practicing using that drill and extracting the core samples, etc., etc. And very sun smart in the Florida sun too with that suit. So I don't think we would have to worry about sunscreen. Geology training, so they had to do a lot of that. Not so much, well, I think they did a little bit in the early missions, and some of the astronauts were more or less interested in geology. They felt that they were jet jockeys and who cares about geology. But some of the later missions, some of the later crew got right into it. So they did a lot of training about geology. Is that your Domino's order? So here's the Apollo 12 crew, I believe, practicing. Looks like Albean's carrying all the gear and the commander's out the front pointing in direction. So they're basically out there working on the sequence, looking at rock samples and structures of the terrain, etc. And I think that's Jim Lovell, and that's Fred Hayes down the bottom there. Once again, looking at samples, photography, etc., etc. So this is fascinating. Some things you find when you're doing this research. At Cinder Lake, they actually simulated. They built a crater field. So they actually got out there and laid it all out and blew up all these explosions and created their own crater field. They dug out some things as well, so just to try and replicate as much as possible what they were going to be experiencing when they get onto the moon. I love it. Airborne training. Obviously, we've all seen the Vomit Comet where they did a 0G training. But they also did 16G training. So they fly the aircraft in a particular configuration so that rather than taking all the gravity off, they have a 1/6 experience like they would on the moon. So there's Buzz on the left-hand side, and I think this is Mitchell and Shepard on the right-hand side, and that's their rickshaw that they took up to the moon. So I'm not sure anyone knows about those. I'm not sure whether the period of 1/6 gravity was greater than the 0G that you get on the Vomit Comet. I don't know. Then there was training out if they landed in the jungle. So here we see different astronauts. I think they went out to, where did they say they went to? Panama, I think they went to other places. And working on, if you land in the jungle, there's no supplies, what are you going to do, how are you going to survive, etc. So there's a few identities here. This is John Glenn and Neil Armstrong. They built their own Coco Hilton and also crossing rivers and that type of thing. So they would dump them out there with the equipment they've got in the spacecraft and tell them to try to make something out of it. So quite fascinating. And then there's the option of dropping into the desert. So you can see some very stylish astronauts in their parachute material, doing some training out there, and then sheltering in the midday sun in a makeshift shelter while they wait to get rescued. So I wonder if they brought alcohol with them. Probably. All right, so of course a very important skill in space, in doing an Apollo mission is rendezvous and docking. So they had to practice, train and test that. So they built various different systems to be able to do that. So one of them was once again at Langley. Langley was involved in a lot of this sort of stuff in building 1244. This rendezvous docking simulator, which went through various iterations, and you can see here it's basically, once again, a set of cables and a rig to be able to allow them to fly the command module to the lunar module. And this looks like an earlier version of the lunar module up there. So quite fascinating. We've got a little video here, which, once again, I'm not sure it's got audio or not. I think it does. No, it doesn't. One of the few times you see the actual things in motion. Yeah, so once again, we dropped over back to the Langley. Might skip forward on that because we've sort of seen that. Now, someone might be able to tell me about this. This is the multiple access space test inertia facility, and these pictures are from '59. Basically, and I think if people have seen First Man, you would have seen Neil and the other astronauts fighting with it. Now, I don't know. I don't see much evidence of this being used in later training, like Gemini and Apollo. I don't know whether they felt it was unnecessary. I don't know, people may be able to enlighten me. But this is the unit here, and this is its in motion. So it's in 3 dimensions, and the astronaut or the person riding it's supposed to be.
But it was used to the movie First Man.
It was, but what context though? Was it in his early days? In the pre-Gemini, I thought so. I hadn't seen anything post Mercury.
Still not sure if the Gemini 8 still was 3 axes. At least 1 axis and most probably 2 axes. But I don't know if it was 3 axes.
Yeah, but I don't know whether this training unit was in use at that era, at that stage. Anyway, this thing certainly was used. This is nicknamed the Great Train Wreck, and this was probably the single unit they probably spent most, especially the command module pilot, spent most of their time. This is the command module simulator. This is connected to computers to drive all the displays, react to the astronauts' inputs. It was able to be connected to mission control, the actual mission control, and there was also like a mission control here that was designed to put in errors and problems, etc., throw them at them. So basically what it is, you've got a command module in the centre here with all these optical display units feeding video into the display in the windows. That's quite fascinating. So this is Mike Collins actually in the simulator, taking a break, waving a chat to somebody. There was another picture there. So yeah, so that basically had lots of things, and people seen Apollo 13. You would have seen them. They spent so much time sitting there working out how they were going to get them back on the power they had and that type of thing. Once again, brushed over a lot of detail, but that's kind of the facility that was in. When I went to the States back in the early 80s, this was actually still set up in this configuration. It's since been dismantled. The actual spacecraft at the centre of it is, I can't remember where it's displayed, but all this other stuff's not there. It's stored or somewhere, I don't know where it is. Now, in conjunction with that, there was also the lunar module mission simulator. Very similar type of configuration with all these displays feeding into the windows of the vehicle, of the simulator. Once again, designed to be able to put all the displays in, all the programs, the computer programs, to test things, to run things, to work together. And they would have been working with the command module guy in the command module at that time, and also mission control, either the guys local putting in the different inputs or the actual mission control in Houston, well, in the mission control centre. So once again, I think that display unit is at the. Anyone been over there? Looks like this. I think it's in Huntsville. That particular unit. I think there's more than one of those. There's only one in the command module one, but I think it's two lunar module ones. And this is once again that bloke keeps popping up inside that simulator, working through the procedures. They spent once again a lot of time in there. And to drive the displays for those, back we're talking pre-computer digital graphics and CGI, they basically had built all these models and they basically filmed them with TV cameras and fed them into those simulators. So this is one of the models. There's a whole range of different types of models, 3D models made of plaster and cardboard and wood and all that sort of thing. And they would film them and the camera would move in correspondence with the astronaut's input and the vehicle and in the simulator. And this is the kind of display that they would see out of the window. So the astronaut said it was really good quality. So, for 50 years ago to be doing that, it was pretty impressive. Lunar rover. Obviously, the lunar rover was not used early on in the first missions landing, but in the last three, the missions, they did use a lunar rover. So they built replicas of these rovers, obviously to operate in 1G, and they would spend time driving around, working on the procedures in conjunction with setting up experiments and documenting things and how they would go in different locations, etc. Now, this is the one of the test ones that they built for the Delco Electronics division, GM. Now they also had another one. So this is some fit tests and basically this is Marshall Space Flight Centre. So they had different bits of equipment at different locations, focusing on different things. Okay, so this on the right hand side, once again, that we saw that picture before. There, that's in at the Kennedy Space Centre. This was an interesting one. I've only ever seen one evidence of it being used. This was called the Lunar Rover Training SMK-23 Flight Simulator. Basically, it was a flight simulator, like a traditional aircraft simulator, but it was modified for use. So basically the way it works is they had the operators here, you can see them sitting here with their Lunar Rover controller, and a surface running on a conveyor belt by the looks of it, and the camera. So basically what they're doing is they're sitting here simulating driving around the rover. I don't know how valuable that training would have been, but anyway, they kind of went through it. I got a really interesting little film here. Once again, I'm not sure how much value. We should have asked Charlie when he was here how much value you got out of that. But let's have a look at the film. It's voiced over, unrelated to the imagery, but it sort of talks a bit about the mission and what they.
Expressions of other topographic features. They bend around small craters and big crater walls and things like that. And whether we're seeing always the same thing or whether there's several things that contribute to this effect, I can't sort that out.
Could you see them from 60 nautical miles without the binocular?
I would say no. I really don't remember offhand, but I think not, because it was so dramatic to me when we came down in the parking orbit that as we got closer to the surface, they started popping out, and they were very significant at 10 to 8 mile range, but I remember seeing them always, and I think it must have been using the binoculars that showed them up.
By always, do you mean the low sun angle parts of your orbits, or even at high sun azimuth?
Always.
Always.
Like I say, I have the feeling that if I ever found a place that didn't have that pattern, it would be very unique.
Mm-hmm. In the local area, is there much deviation in orientation?
In the Cayley area where we were?
Any area. Any local
Oh.
area, much deviation in orientation.
Well,
I do apologise for that, but the look on Charlie Duke's face particularly is kind of bemused about what are we doing here with this training. Anyway. Some other things, once again, Lunar Rover. These guys out at the Geological Surveys, Astrogeology Band, actually went ahead and built for them their own lunar rover for use out in their facility. So you can see there's pictures on their website of them building it from scratch, and bolting the wheels on and welding the frame together until they end up with this rover vehicle. And I thought this picture was particularly good. That's the jet jockey Gene Cernan with his cute little beanie on. Must have been cold that day. I thought that was kind of cute. And once again, they parked the Grover, and used these sort of handmade sort of backpack mock-ups to be able to work on the sequence of looking for samples, picking up samples, photographing them, documenting them, putting them back. So once again, as the missions progressed, the amount of time on the moon and the sophistication of the geology got more sophisticated. All right. So anyone know what that? Oh, is that right? You've seen it, have you?
Yeah, last year we went over there for the eclipse.
Wow, fantastic. So anyone know what this little thing is? Well, you'll find out. This is James Burke.
The last thing anybody wants now is an emergency. But like everything else, they're ready for that too.
Once the crew are on board, if it looks as if they're in danger, they get out and head down this tube, specially insulated against fire, and zigzagging down not to some point out and away from the rocket, but to an escape room exactly where you'd think it shouldn't be.
Three and a half minutes after they get the warning in the capsule, the crew could be down here in the blast escape room via that 200-foot escape tube, 40 feet below the base of the rocket. They find themselves in a totally rubber room, walls and floors, and they head for safety through a 6-inch steel door. Once they're behind that door, it doesn't matter what comes down this tube behind them. On this side of that door, the rarely seen blast escape room itself. It's totally isolated from everything around it by a series of 24 giant springs underneath the floor and shells all round it of steel, concrete and sand. It contains enough food, water and air for 20 people for up to 24 hours, and it's all around the edge. There are these foam rubber shock-absorbing seats, as you can see. The room is built to withstand the simultaneous explosion of every drop of fuel on a Saturn V. And in that event, strapped into your shock-absorbing seat, if your rocket did blow itself to bits 40 feet above your head, all you'd feel would be a mild rumble from somewhere up there.
All right. So, as usual, there's no way I could have covered everything. I've given you a snippet of some of the things that they did and how they did it and why they did it. I think it's fascinating. But now it's time to return to 2018, everybody. So once again, strap in. Here we go.
What if I went faster?
And we're back. Congratulations, you all made it. All right, so as you could probably work out, our next meeting in December, we're going to be looking at Apollo 8. The key question is, will they get to the moon? No spoilers. Or will they have a problem? And these are the guys that are in training now to do that mission. The prime crew and the backup crew. And their Saturn V is on the pad as we speak. So we'll find out next meeting. Now, in researching this presentation, I came across some fascinating ground-to-orbit voice communication. You might recognise these two people. You might not recognise what they said, but I was fascinated. Okay, I can tell by the the quietness that no one knows who the heck I'm talking about. But anyway, all right. Now, the other thing, our next speaker, Igor Rozenberg, I did a bit of a search on Igor because I wanted to find a bit more about this guy. And I don't know, he's got a bit of a shady past, to be honest. And from what I was able to deduce, he was a model for the Soviet propaganda department. This is him in his early 20s. Igor Rozenberg. Thank you. Oh, you want to put it in? A visual thing.
This brings up a
We're going to break after Igor's presentation.
Okay. I did not expect it to make this presentation because I believe nobody was expected to have this event which happened on 11th of October 2018. Unlike Anatoly Zak, I'm not following in real time because most of the launches actually not coincide with the date I'm here or in US. And I was in Huntsville, Alabama, having fun in space camp, and I'm supposed to sleep like a baby because we have a quite busy program. I will share some photos, not today, otherwise I will hijack whole meeting. I have like 60 different photos from this trip. So I just awake in the middle of the night by unknown reason, and I started to read feeds from Facebook, and it became clear that routine mission to bring new crew, rotating crew to the International Space Station did not achieve this goal. They did not reach an orbit. So unfortunately, I have, in order for me to explain what was happening, I have to give you a lot of boring background information on launcher itself, spacecraft, and how launch escape system work for Soyuz. Some of you would be probably know about this, but I prepared this presentation with assumption that some of you have no idea how launch escape system works and how actually system design in approximately middle of 60 saves the day. So what happened on the date? Crew of 2, usually there is a 3-person crew starting on Soyuz. Russians started to save money, and instead of person, it was replaced by 70 plus kilo of the cargo. Commander Alexei Ovchinin and flight engineer rookie Tyler Haig, they're experiencing something which Russian space program never had. Soviet space program experiences this twice before in the history. Unfortunately, it was so long ago that most of people even didn't remember that this has ever happened. So it was from public relation point of view, it was a complete disaster because it was first meeting of 2 newly appointed director of US Space Agency and Russian Space Agency. It's supposed to be, like I said, it's supposed to be a routine mission, and nobody was expected that the flight of Soyuz MS Chen will take only like less than 20 minutes. So it was quite routine launch and an unexpected landing. At the moment, Russia maintains multiple versions of Soyuz launchers. On the left, you can see Soyuz FG. It's launched from 2001. It's only man-rated vehicle from the family. They have totally 56 manned flight and 10 cargo flight. And this was first case when it became aborted. So far, it was continuous success with almost 100% reliability. There are also two other modifications of Soyuz Soyuz 2.1A and Soyuz 2.1B. Maiden flights happened in 2006 and 2011. The difference are predominantly Soyuz 2.1A has slightly bigger third stage, a little bit more fuel, and Soyuz 2.1B have a completely different engine on the third stage. Unlike Soyuz FG, and this is critical, Soyuz 2 have a Russian-built navigation system, while Soyuz FG is still flying with the Ukrainian guidance, navigation and control system on board. There is also a smaller version which called Soyuz 2.1V, but as you can see, we probably don't take this kind of family in account because it doesn't have side boosters. And I will tell you later on why this side boosters was actually a root cause of whole abnormal of this anomaly. Soyuz, in order to provide mission to International Space Station, you need effectively three big pieces of hardware. You need to have a ground-based equipment and ecology infrastructure, everything on the ground which could allow to assemble rockets and move it to the launch pad. Rocket by itself, launch vehicle, and obviously payload, spacecraft. So when everything going according to the plan, launch pad is ready for the next start. And this is what was expected to be, but it did not happen. Payload. Soyuz MS spacecraft series probably ends the generation of original Soyuz, which flying from 1967. The most critical part about design, which did not change significantly, which consists from three major models. Orbital model, this in the middle, descent module, and service module when all propellant and water and other equipment is stored. First two models are pressurized and they used by crew during the flight. So this is design of Soyuz launch vehicle which actually has been originated by Sergei Korolev. What you can see here is almost all rockets from the family had this design. 4 side boosters, which Russians call carrots, it's a slang, but they obviously have this asymmetrical carrot-like shape. The 4 boosters are...
Just go get the mic now.
Okay, sorry. The 4 boosters combined first stage. What happened during flight? Separation of these four boosters. One of the boosters caused anomaly by colliding with the central core. So when everything was should be normal according to the flight plan, Soyuz LV would use propeller from the side boosters from the first stage, and these carrots would be separated. After that, flights would continue, and propellant would be used by second stage. After second stage separation, the same stuff happened with the third stage until payload will reach orbit. This is nominal flight. And they, original energy designers, you can see on the right side how spacecraft is actually shrouded by payload fairing with launch abort system on the top. So this picture actually explains how staging happened for the first stage. It's a quite ingenious process. What happened first? There are lower assembly of the 4 blocks which would be ignited during separation. The pyrotechnique would destroy all connectors between blocks, and it effectively will open like an umbrella. At the same time, because they did not produce any thrust, the central core will actually fly a little bit forward, which allow to slide. You see the point when it's called the ball joining. At this moment, the ball joining would be opened, and the top of this carrot would be softly sliding on the reverse cone of the central core. What happened at this particular moment, control system will open two valves. First, this carrot has oxygen tank on the top, fuel tank on the bottom, and on the very bottom of the engine. So at this precise moment, two valves for each carrot has to be open, which started to tumble and rotate each carrot in this direction. It means that it seems very unusual design, but this has been done purposely to make sure that all boosters would clear up, and they will try to avoid collision as quickly as possible. What happened with one particular carrot at that time, this is actually how it looked like in the progress. As you can see, they're not just moving aside, they started to tumble and they quickly moving out of the path. This technique called Korolev crest, because at the time of separation you can see constellation of the 5 dots. Central one is the central core, and the 4 on the sides is what you can see, it was boosters. Because there are remaining of the fuel, usually pattern called also Medusa. This is what happened with a nominal flight when boosters are separated. And this is tower of launch escape system, which actually saved the day on 11th of October. This is spacecraft, and it's obviously not visible on this screen. What they do during assembly, they're making sure that first 2 modules connected together and they can be separated. I explain you on next slide. I mentioned this was not first time when it happened. The first crew which experienced abort flight was Soyuz 18A mission in April 1975, which was so-called 5 of April anomaly. Lazarev and Makarov. Makarov supposed to be a second man on lunar landing mission with Leonov, but it did not happen. Lazarev actually never flew after this event because of health condition. Makarov flew a couple of missions later on in the end of 70s. What happened, it was a different situation. They experienced an event when second and third stage of Soyuz launch vehicle didn't separate it. Soyuz T-10A in September 1983 experiencing launch pad abort when rocket fuel was leaking and it was ignition on this launch pad, and only system which has been designed in middle of 60s saved the crew. Again, this is the launch escape system has been activated by, there is an officer, launch range officer, who is responsible for activation of the system. When they realize everything is catastrophic, I will tell you on next slide how it's going to work. Okay. Okay. So again, this is nominal profile. What happened with the T-10 abort when command is done to activate launch escape system? Solid rockets on the tower, on the launch escape tower, started to pull orbital model and descent module together out of the rocket, giving distance. At the same time, there are grids on the side of the Soyuz PLF, payload fairing, which actually stabilize everything to make sure that it's working on the right angle. After this block, this head block, is moved in more or less safe area, shroud is opened, and there is a separation between orbital module and descent module, and depending on which altitude and what was time of the flight, either main parachute or backup parachute would be involved. This is not exactly what happened during this flight. I will try to explain you later on. Soyuz manufacturer Samara Rocket Space actually operates on 3 different continents. This is spaceports they're using. The spaceports located in 3 countries. We have 4 spaceports with 7 launch pads. So what happened after this event? I don't know how they managed, but it seems to be that the program was very resilient. As soon as they finalized root cause, what happened, it actually was actuator. We didn't open valve, which prevent one of the boosters to rotate. And because it did not clear the area of the central block, it's effectively collided with the central core and punctured it, causing explosion. What happened during this flight is last tower was already jettisoned at this moment, but they have a secondary rocket engine on top of PLF, payload fairing, which actually again did the trick. They have enough altitude to open parachutes, but what they did, they pull out orbital module and descent module, and everything was done according to scenario I described you before. Like I said, all rockets in the family have the same design. So as soon as they found root cause, they have to make sure before launching next manned mission, they have to be sure that the rocket is reasonably reliable to do this. So what happened? 25th of October, they launched a cargo version of the same rocket from Plesetsk. It's exactly 2 weeks. 3rd of November, they launched another payload, Russian GPS version from Plesetsk. It's another week. On 7th of November, they launched a commercial payload from French Guiana in Kourou. And Progress, they move Progress spacecraft, cargo spacecraft to Soyuz FG launch vehicle to make sure that Soyuz is ready for manned flight. Usually, it's already transferred. All of the Progresses now supposed to fly on different rockets. And we're expecting on next Monday, next manned flight. So in less than 2 months, they completely recovered from this anomaly, which are actually showing that all design decisions made in 60 still working, and the whole vehicle, the whole system, it's very reliable. And this is actually photo of next crew meeting US ambassador, which is a big deal. So I would not have time. I will share this presentation. I still have only 1 minute, which I believe I should give you a chance to ask any questions.
So the abort was initiated from the ground, or automatic, or from the crew?
Okay, not from the ground. Ground was in constant communication with the crew. Crew had to prepare for this event, and they did some procedure. It was not fully automated. It's my understanding, at least. What
There's no like a port handle that they pulled?
No.
Do they have one?
No. It was interesting during TV feed. Actually, the journalists who actually sharing our mission coming, they just read script. They didn't realize that something going completely wrong. Crew was recovered again. It's the whole story. It's like a title of the book. What is the color of your parachute? Parachute is a good thing. It's nice to have, but better not to use it. And the interesting fact was Russian media was became completely ballistic in criticizing Russian space program because they believe it was complete disaster and failure from public relation point of view. US and Western media actually was probably more cheerful and more optimistic, considering that last time NASA has launched anomaly, it was actually a very bad event during 1986. So they actually, head of NASA actually make a statement, official statement, that he believes that Russian space program is apparently not dead yet. Yeah.
Why do you say the system crisis is not over? Why is it not over? They returned to flight in 2 months. They found the problem. What's the issue?
Okay, there are two questions here. Russian space program is very conservative. I give you another fact. The onboard camera on top of Soyuz was installed by request of French engineers just to check how it would fly from Kourou. Before this, they simply were afraid to change anything. The problem with the space technology, especially with the old space technology, it's very difficult to bring something new because they unless you thoroughly test it. So this particular unit, this actuator, they have the same technology process for approximately, I don't know, 1,600 launches. They had problem before, like in 50s, causing with stage separation, but last time it happened in unmanned flight, this particular reason probably was 20 years ago. They cannot, unlike software development, I believe space engineering is very conservative, especially Russian space engineering. Unless something fundamentally changed, they stick to their procedures which work. This probably answers the first question. System crisis, again, we can talk about this for another minute, which I don't have because I'm 3 minutes overdue. It was a huge generation gap from 90s because it was not any opportunity to make a generation, to bring new generation and give knowledge from the old guys, which effectively almost extinct. So human factor probably the biggest problem, plus they did not do more, apart of Angara, there were not any new development. There were some modernization, but not new development. Yes?
So we know this is a cover story, you and I know what really happened. It was brought down by Ukrainian missiles. So tell us the real story.
Why they need to do some such expensive thing? On board of this rocket there is Ukrainian navigation system. Everything much simpler.
All right. Thank you, Igor. Thanks for that. All right, we're going to take about a 10-minute break. Stand up, stretch your legs, and we'll reconvene shortly. Help yourself with something to eat or drink. Say hello to somebody you haven't met before. We'll see you back there.
Are we ready to go? Testing 1, 2, 3. Lights, camera. Can you hear me okay?
Bit of order in the house.
I'll have a pizza. Pineapple.
That we use that time.
Okay. We're right with everything? Okay. Welcome to this month's Space News. I'm Angelo de Grazia. For those that don't know me, I'm a committee member of the association, and I drew the short straw for these presentations every month. That's all right, Mike helps me with this. The first thing we'll do is we'll start with Australian space. Finally, after all these years, we can actually start with Australian space news. And the first one is Black Sky Aerospace. It's a Brisbane-based aerospace company. The other day, it conducted its first launch from Queensland. It was a suborbital flight, and it was a 5-metre long Cyter 190 sounding rocket, which soared to 20,000 feet, which is 5,100 metres, and reached a maximum speed of about 1.2 Mach in a few seconds. So it had a mass of about 80 kilos, so it wasn't a huge rocket, but it's propelled by solid fuel consisting of aluminium chloride and proprietary ingredients. But what it did do is it carried a couple of commercial payloads. One for the world's first hypersonic scramjet launch vehicle test from Hypersonics, and the other one was from Decanu, a device developed for targeting skydivers. So BSA is currently working on a range of suborbital rockets and is positioning itself as a suborbital payload delivery system provider. There it is. Very nice. And this comes off their webpage. And there's some more pictures. This tells you a little bit about BSA and what its aspirations are. Means go up, do your test and come down. Doesn't go into orbit. However, I'm told from reliable sources, which I'll mention in a minute, there isn't orbital aspirations. And here is the faces of these people. And I looked at that and said, holy cow, I know one of those guys. And he happens to be sitting right over there, behind you. So hold your hand up, David Boyd. He is one of our. I thought he'd gone hiding with ASIO and doing some, covert actions when he said, "I can't tell you too much of what I'm doing." Well, this is what he's been doing, which is fantastic. I'm going to play a little video here that appeared on the news. So it's a big deal.
What a great day for Queensland to have witnessed the first Australian suborbital flight with a commercial payload. The first time this has happened in Australia, and it is happening in Queensland. 90 years ago this year, 26,000 people went to another paddock. It was called the Eagle Farm Airport. And on the 9th of June 1928, 4 men came out of an aircraft, and one of them was Sir Charles Kingsford Smith. And that was the first flight across the Pacific. And Charles Kingsford Smith was born in Brisbane. He was a Queenslander. And 90 years later, we've got men and women at the cutting edge of science, of aviation and of space technology, taking Queensland into a new age. This launch today is a great leap for our state because we are showcasing to Australia and the world that we are a leader when it comes to the space industry. So as a government, we want to provide those new jobs in the new economy, and this rocket launch is just the start.
Congratulations, David. Thanks very much, mate. The other upstart is Gilmore Space. They've actually signed a long-term collaboration agreement with a Swiss company called Rogue Space. They actually are quite big in the industry, actually. A number of people use them. A number of big spaceflight organisations use them. It's the first of its kind in Australia, and it's basically to help Gilmore Space provide its launch services. So at the moment, they're trying to launch small satellites of 100 kilos into low Earth orbit from 2020 up to 400 kilograms from 2021. Good question. I'll come to that. Maybe there might be a place. Australian Space Agency. The Australian government approved a space charter. I'm not going to go into it in a great detail, but the charter really specifies that an independent, skills-based advisory board will provide advice to the agency that's headed up by Dr. Megan Clark. The charter builds on the establishment of the Australian Space Agency to advance space industry, of course, and provide local jobs, and also provide high-level strategic overview of the agency, laying out the government's approved governance arrangements, including purpose, responsibilities, roles, the heads of the agencies, etc. So it's pretty good, and they're actually starting consultation groups shortly, and there were 3, the Australian Government Space Coordination Committee, the Space Industry Leaders Forum, and the State and Territories Space Coordination Meeting. Expert review groups will be formed as needed. So from the formation of the agency in July of last year, things have snowballed. You know, they've really moved along. So it's great to see. Also in America, there was a bipartisan bill that was introduced in the House. Interestingly enough, the resolution was supported, obviously, 10 to 52, but what puzzled me was, why would 10 be against such cooperation? But anyway.
That's the number of the resolution. Resolution 1052.
Are you sure?
Yes.
Okay. I was trying to work that out. I couldn't understand it. Why would anyone go against it? All right, you've clarified it. Yeah. No, that's good. Other Australian news, and this is part of maybe Gilmore Space and part of David's crew. There's an equatorial launch. Australia is in the process of building Australia's first commercial orbital launch site near Nullarbor in Northern Territory. So we may have an Indigenous launch site in Australia very shortly, which is fantastic.
Indigenous people agree to that.
Yes, they have. And David, did you want to? It won't come across here, Dave, on the streaming, but. Which is great to see. Now we'll go to our cousins across the ditch. Of course, we know the Electron, and it flies out of the northeast coast of New Zealand, and it's Rocket Lab's Electron. There's the new facilities they've got in Auckland. Well, Rocket Lab finally launched its Electron rocket, dubbed its business time at the start of its launch window on the 11th of November, and it successfully deployed its payloads. The mission launched 6 satellites, 2 for Spire Global, 2 additional passengers for the Fleet Space Technologies, and a couple of others. So great effort by the New Zealanders. Of course, we know that Rocket Lab is, partly funded through the US government and other funding sources. The launch was scheduled in April this year, but they then deferred it to June, where they found some problems, and hence they fixed the problems and went on to a November date. The company does hope that now they're going to start ramping up these launches and certainly do them at a much more intense rate. They also announced a lot more funding. They just raised another $140 million, which really, their valuation is now $1 billion plus for the company, which is pretty remarkable, really. And no doubt it will continue to go north. So all the best of luck, obviously, to Rocket Lab. And here is
5, 4,
the movie.
3, 2, 1.
Vehicle.
And stable.
Beautifully done. All right, now let's talk about America, space policy, which always impacts on what's happening in the world. The National Space Council met recently, and again, on the discussion paper was the Space Force. The Council did actually sign off to actually establish the Space Force. And Vice President Pence said in yellow about President Trump, he asks me about the Space Force every week. So there you go. So it must be a space buff. However, the recent midterm congressional elections have kind of thrown a spanner in the works here. Representative John Culberson, Republican Texas, chairman of the Appropriations Subcommittee, lost and didn't get re-elected. Now, he was a major supporter of space, believe it or not, including some of the big, NASA programs like the Europa mission and a few others. So, in a way, he will be a loss. Now, the Republicans retained control of the Senate, but the Democrats have a majority in the House. It'll obviously be interesting to see how space funding moves forward on that basis. Senator Bill Nelson, Democrat Florida, interestingly enough, lost his seat, and now he was also a major space advocate. Nelson, you might recall, was also a shuttle astronaut, but he was also the top Democrat on the Senate Commerce Committee, which is part of the committee that actually funds NASA. NASA's Administrator Jim Bridenstine said recently that the defeat of a key appropriator in recent elections and budget cutting exercises were obviously a concern. In particular, where they're trying to cut 5% off all budgets across the federal budgets.
The committee lost his seat because the Democrats are the majority in the House. They take leadership of all the House committees.
Yeah, they do.
So it would have changed anyway.
Anyway, so Bridenstine says if they don't get funded the way they're planning, and it's at a snail's pace at best, as we know, he says we're not going to have what we need to go to the moon, let alone Mars. Advocates of the Space Force were also a little bit, they're not going to get the support that they would otherwise have had. If the Democrats dig their heels in, the Space Force is likely to be killed off simply because it's a Trump idea. So anyway, the other one is obviously some senators are pushing to get some of the big projects like the James Webb fully funded, even though that's blown its budget by an enormous amount. And of course, W First, to make sure that that happens. It's a great mission, but if you recall, Trump tried to kill that mission off, so he's trying to reinstate it. Let's talk the International Space Station. Igor sort of covered this, but a Progress cargo spacecraft recently docked to the station. The Soyuz FG, carrying the Progress M10, launched from Baikal, placed the spacecraft into orbit minutes later. The launch is the fourth of the Soyuz after the, and Igor covered this, after the launch abort. A day after, we had the Cygnus spacecraft launched, and that's now under the Northrop Grumman banner, and it launched the Antares, and it was fittingly the SS John Young, which is a fitting name for a spacecraft. I want to show you this because this is just brilliant. This is a Russian picture of the MS-10 Progress spacecraft. Arrow. Certainly beats CGI anytime. Beautiful. This is the launch of Antares. I might just skip that. And this is Cygnus.
Very soon you'll see the view of Cygnus gets slowly darker. We're crossing
This
into
was before docking to the space station.
Now you can see.
Moving on. Now the MS-10 Abort, Igor has covered these, so I won't go into great detail. But you can see the pictures on the left when the booster pretty much just about to hit the centre core, and on the right when it actually did. I won't go into most of this other than Igor has said that they are on target to launch on the 3rd of December, MS-11, which is fantastic. This is a video of the actual launch. It was playing before. I won't play this because it was playing during the interval, but I will play the simulation. So that was I'll have to go back, leave it to loose time, Len. There it is. You can see the separation. You can clearly see on the right. That's taken from the video. That's a picture, but you can see the moment that it didn't separate properly. They, as Igor said, they spiral down. This one obviously ran amok and hit the centre core. This is just after they got recovered. Now, MS-11, the actual spacecraft that's going to be used for the next mission, has actually had a leak test and it's passed. If you recall, MS-9 had a hole in it. There it is. So they're going to do a spacewalk to see what potentially may have caused the hole. You know, they've got all sorts of theories, from the factory, from the launch site, to an American astronaut with a drill. So it'll be interesting to see what comes out of that particular review. Commercial crew. This will probably be the last article that I talk about. Commercial crew. Finally, there's been some movement. You've got CST-100, the Boeing on the left-hand side, and you've got Crew Dragon on the right. NASA plans to review the safety culture of the commercial crew providers, Boeing and SpaceX. They just announced that. The review will look at issues ranging from how many hours employees work at the companies to drug use policies. Wonder why that came up. NASA didn't explain why they undertook the review so late, but sources said it was triggered by the actions of SpaceX CEO Elon Musk, which included a video of him smoking marijuana. That agency officials deemed a little bit erratic. Both companies in separate statements emphasise their commitment to safety, including policies on a drug-free workplace. So that's interesting. Having done that, though, having done that, though, not long after that, NASA announced the actual new revised schedule. Two of these demonstrations are under crewed. We're running out of time, guys, please. Two of these demonstrations are uncrewed flight tests, known as orbital flight tests for Boeing and demo for SpaceX. After the uncrewed flight tests, both companies will carry out spacecraft abort tests. The final tests will be crewed flights to the ISS, culminating in accreditation and contracted supply missions to the space station. Now, what I'll do is I'll go straight to the launch schedules. This is the revised schedule for Boeing. In March 2019, we have an uncrewed orbital flight test number 1, March. Second quarter, we have a pad abort. It's not going to be an in-flight abort, it'll be on the pad. August, we have the crewed OFT-2. In December, it'll probably be the second operational mission to ISS because SpaceX will do it first. This is just a quick video. There you go. There's the fairing coming off as it's going up. SpaceX, here's their dates. This first date was brought forward. They are now launching on the 7th of January 2019. And that's great news. Will be the unmanned. The second quarter, there will be a Crew Dragon in-flight abort test. So they'll actually fly one and shoot the capsule off the top. In June, we look like getting the first men up to the space station on Crew Dragon. August is the timeline for the first operational mission to ISS. So those, they are very good news. They probably will slip again, but it's great to see that they're now got dates. I've got a minute. All right, NASA General. I might just finish off with I'll do the video, the NASA video, Mike, and this will probably be it. There's a hell of a lot of other news, but as always, you just don't have time to cover it all. Needless to say, there's a lot going on.
Ignition sequence start. All engines are running.
We have taken tremendous steps.
We choose to go to the moon before this decade is out.
We have achieved the earth-shaking, the breathtaking, the groundbreaking, and left a mark in the heavens. Our successes build one upon another and amplify what is possible. It's time we take the next great leap. We're building the next chapter of American exploration, returning to the moon to stay, so we can go beyond to Mars, to expand what's possible and further our understanding. The architecture for these missions is already taking shape. We will go with new systems, bold designs, and a sustainable mission. You can hear it, taste it, touch it. We are going. We are training, testing, pressing our pioneering spirit into every component, defining our resolve with every line of code, and securing our success with every welcomed partnership. This is not hypothetical. This is not about flags and footprints. This is about sustainable science and feeding forward the advance of the human spirit. Because we are the pioneers, the star sailors, the thinkers, the visionaries, the doers. And because we stand on the shoulders of giants to go farther than humanity has ever been, we will add our names to the rolls of the greatest adventurers in history. Every day, every mission, we advance this calling. We are NASA. And after 60 years, we're just getting started.
There you go. Bit of hype, but it certainly reinforces that there's a heck of a lot going on. So with that, one last comment, and I've got a picture somewhere in here, but don't forget tomorrow morning, starting about 6:30, we have NASA lands its Mars Insight, or hopefully lands its Mars Insight on Mars. So keep your eye out open for that one. That'll be another one of those great events. Thank you.
Make contact, whether it's a controlled contact or a not controlled contact. We'll see.
And the NASA TV tomorrow on that starts at 6 o'clock, and the landing's at 7 o'clock. Okay. Okay, I'm going to start today with a few movies, because usually what happens is I show a few slides and then I run out of time for the movies. So my name's Angelo Rennie, and for those of you who are interested in science fiction, can I get rid of that? There's something on the screen here though. Okay. Right, just let's stop it there. And do you recognise that? Yeah, for those of you who are interested in science fiction, I thought that might be of interest to you. Now, the Kepler mission has just finished, and got a little thing here which shows what's going to happen to the Kepler spacecraft now that the mission has finished. And so, Michael, can I get rid of this overlay? Because I can't see where we're up to in the movie.
The big screen.
That's it. Got it. Right. So you see then that the Kepler will catch up with the Earth, then swap orbits, and then the same thing will happen again for the foreseeable future. Now, that motion is very similar to what happens with the two co-orbitals of Saturn, that is Janus and Epimetheus. So we're seeing here in two frames of reference, and they're actually so close enough that they will not pass each other. If that didn't happen, what you saw then didn't happen, they would crash into each other. And this happens every 4 years for these two particular satellites of Saturn. And again, they're coming up towards another swap. And that's because of the mutual gravitational attraction. Okay. Well, here's another animation, highly sped up, showing these two moons. And you see they approach, swap orbits, and then move away from each other. They approach, swap orbits. Every 4 years that happens. So Kepler's going to do much the same sort of thing with the Earth. Now, moving on. You need to watch this very, very closely. This is a movie taken from space of Chicago. Now, to get a still picture from space of that detail was something that only the military could do until fairly recently. Just play it once more, if I can. Okay, go back. And have a look at that again. And you'll notice, oops, there we go. Play? No? Press the play button. All right. Have a look at the freeway. See the traffic moving on the freeway? If you look closely at some of the city streets, you can see traffic moving along the streets as well. And something that you probably didn't notice, take a look at the building on the top left-hand side of the screen. Now I'm going to move that back fast and watch the shadow and the apparent shape of the building. You can actually see that the satellite is moving during that. Okay, so you can find that on the European Space Agency website if you're interested in that. Now, something I've mentioned on the space show is we're doing a series on orbital debris at the moment, and they've put this European Student Earth Orbiter craft into space, and near the end of its orbit, it's going to do the following. Somewhere about here. Here we go. This is a satellite, all parts built by students in the European Space Agency countries. Now, watch this. Out comes a sail. And of course that's going to increase drag, which is going to bring the craft down sooner. So debris is something that's really starting to spook out the space agencies of the world. They realise that if they don't do something about it very soon, they're going to have the gravity type scenario where things break into pieces. Now, this instrument is going to be launched soon into space to map carbon. Although the name is GEDI, it's pronounced Jedi. Again, a reference to science fiction. So there's a little instrument that you can watch out for going to be launched. And again, it's going to help monitor the carbon balance on our planet. So it's the Global Ecosystem Dynamics Investigation, otherwise known as JEDI. So I'm doing the planetary report, and the planet at the moment here is Earth. Now, as we've mentioned already, there's going to be a landing on Mars tomorrow, and apologies to those of you who have already seen this movie, but there should be narration with this one. Sound, please. Rob Manning, of course, you know him from previous landings. Do I have to do something here to put the sound up? Yeah. Sound. Ah, right.
The process starts well above the top of the atmosphere of Mars. The cruise stage faces the sun. It also although we've done it before, landing on Mars is hard, and this mission is no different. The process to get from the top of the atmosphere of Mars to the surface we call entry, descent, and landing, or EDL. It takes thousands of steps to go from the top of the atmosphere to the surface, and each one of them has to work perfectly to be a successful mission. The process starts well above the top of the atmosphere of Mars. The cruise stage faces the sun. It also has its radio antenna, which faces Earth. But now we don't need the cruise stage. Its job is done. The next step, just 7 minutes before arriving to the top of the Mars atmosphere, is to separate the cruise stage. Before you hit the top of the atmosphere, though, the space capsule has to orient itself so that the heat shield is precisely facing the atmosphere. Now the fun begins. The vehicle is moving at nearly 13,000 miles an hour, but it's hitting the top of the atmosphere at a very shallow angle, 12 degrees. Any steeper, the vehicle will hit the thicker part of the atmosphere and will melt and burn up. Any shallower, the vehicle will bounce off the atmosphere of Mars. At the very top of the atmosphere, it's about 70 miles above the surface of Mars, and the air is starting to get thicker and thicker and thicker. As it does that, the temperature of that heat shield gets well over 1,000 degrees centigrade, enough to melt steel. Over the next 2 minutes, the vehicle decelerates at a backbreaking 12 Earth Gs, from 13,000 miles an hour to about 1,000 miles an hour. At about 10 miles above the surface of Mars, a supersonic parachute is launched out of the back of the vehicle. 15 seconds after the parachute inflates, it's time to get rid of the heat shield. 6 pyrotechnic devices fire simultaneously, allowing the heat shield to fall and tumble away from the vehicle, exposing the lander to the surface of Mars. 10 seconds after the heat shield is dropped, 3 pyrotechnically deployed legs are released and locked for landing. About a minute later, the landing radar is turned on, sending pulses toward the surface of Mars as the vehicle starts to try to measure how high it is above the surface and how fast it's going. At about a mile above the surface of Mars, the lander falls away from the back shell and lights its engines. And very quickly, the vehicle must rotate out of the way so that the parachute and the back shell doesn't come down to hit it. The last thing that has to happen is that on the moment of contact, the engines have to shut down immediately. If they don't, the vehicle will tip over. So if all the steps of entry, descent, and landing happen perfectly and we are safely on the surface of Mars, we'll be ready to do some exciting new science.
Science is seismology and heat flow experiment. They're going to drill down hopefully 5 meters into the surface and presumably this, yes, close that. Right, now I'm going to try and select the slides now for the slideshow. And it doesn't have file names. Okay, right. No, it's not completely listed. No. All right, try this way. Michael, I can't get the other one. I wanted a list view, and I've got sort of side-by-side list view. I want to get these ones as well. View. Ah, good one. Thank you. Thank you. Right, here we go. Oh, it's just done one. Okay, try again. Now, Houston, we've got a problem. Won't open. I tried to open a new window. I tried double-clicking it, only opened one of them. I've selected them all. Open. Right. Rocket Lab. You saw this in the launch video. This is the view showing the CubeSats that were launched, including 2 from Australia. And if I use this, I might be able to advance the slideshow. Yes. And one of the payloads which is attached to the rocket stage, to the Curie stage, yeah, you want. Good one. Thank you. Was a drag sail. Again, back to this problem of orbital debris. Now, Rocket Lab with the Electron rocket and the Curie upper stage can fire, they have enough fuel left in that to actually make the upper stage slow down and begin its descent to a destructive re-entry. But on this particular flight, they deployed a drag sail with the experiments, again, to see if they can mitigate the problem of orbital debris. Given that these people putting up now hundreds of satellites, like India put up 100 satellites in one go, was it last year? It's a problem. Not to mention the problem of exploded rocket stages. So if they can get the rocket stage out of orbit, that will go a long way towards mitigating the problem. Here's an artist's impression of the InSight landing tomorrow morning. Hopefully, this is going to happen. Cross fingers. And once on the ground, the idea is it will drill down, not to the centre of Mars as shown in this picture, but 5 metres down, if it can. Now, given the difficulty of drilling into surfaces, I have doubts whether they'll actually get down 5 metres, but let's hope they do. And there are heat probes along the tether, and that will measure the temperature at various points under the surface and hence be able to determine how much heat is flowing out of the surface. The other thing you'll notice on the surface there is that thing looking like a saucepan. That's the seismometer, which they had trouble developing in because it developed a pressure leak, and it has to be put down on the surface. Now, I have asked the press people at, the public affairs officers at JPL, can they use the arm, the remote manipulator arm, to sort of shove a few rocks aside if they need to get a clear space to put it down? And the rascals haven't replied to my email yet, and that's about a month ago, so we'll see. That's the weather report from November 18, showing the weather at the landing site. And you'll see the InSight's going to land very near Curiosity, and these are the temperatures at various latitudes and longitudes. So at 16 miles, about 30 kilometres above the surface of Mars. The 2 Mars Cube, the MarsCo satellites, this is Marco B, taking pictures, and that's one of the first pictures they got of Mars. And you can see, you can read the graphic there. And more recently, they took another one, but you see Mars has got a little bit larger in the picture as they close in on Mars. And they're going to, those high-gain antennae are intended to send signals back to Earth. As the 2 Mars cubes will just fly past Mars, but hopefully send back data from the lander as it's descending to the surface. Meanwhile, they've announced where the Mars 2020 will land, and that's going to be at this crater, which is called Grazia, and it's on the western edge of Isidis Planitia. And that's a picture of the crater, and you see it's very geologically interesting. You can see there a ravine and an outflow channel onto the plain, and so it will likely have materials from the highland areas as well as impact crater debris and all sorts of stuff. So a very interesting site, but it's going to be difficult to land in. So the idea of the landing sequence is shown here. where in real time it will take photos of where it's going to land and say, no, better go over here, and do a sort of a Neil Armstrong and avoid the dangerous areas. The InSight lander, by the way, does not have a descent camera, so don't expect any descent images tomorrow. All right, let's move on. Hayabusa, the Japanese probe at an asteroid called Ryugu. And this is an ascent animation showing it came down and almost touched the surface and then moved away. This is several weeks ago now. All right. Just wait for that animation to recycle. There it goes. Okay. The shadow and the sun glint are in the same place because the sun is directly behind Hayabusa. And a few stills of that. And that circle is one of the markers. It dropped. It's got 5 markers on board. And the idea is that it drops them on the surface and then it uses that as a reference point when it's making its touchdown to grab a soil sample. So that's one of the markers that's already been dropped on the surface. There is a camera on board, actually there's 2 cameras on board that were funded by the public. This is one of them. And so they said, the Japanese Space Agency said, we haven't got enough money for this mission. Please, bakshish, give us some money. And the public did, and that's one of the cameras that's funded by the public. And that camera is mounted so they can take pictures like this, or this picture here. And what you see here is part of the spacecraft, and that thing like a inverted pie dish is the actual probe that will touch down on the surface and pick up the rock samples. Now, what's interesting, if you look at that picture and the next one, you'll see the red circle there, a difference. And the reason is that that is a little mirror, or shiny point, and light from a laser on the spacecraft is shone on that mirror and reflects into a sensor. Now, when it touches down on the surface, the foot, I'll call it a foot, will be compressed. And that will shift the mirror out of the way of the beam. And when the electronics on board senses, hey, I'm no longer getting the signal, it says, I must be on the surface, time to go into the action of firing some pellets down onto the surface and hopefully knocking some dust up into the collector. So this is the sensing device which will allow the Hayabusa, which has to do this independently, of course, because it's so far from the sun that it takes too long for light or radio signals to travel there and back for direct commanding. So that's the thing. That's with the light off, and that's with the light on. Okay. The landing area is shown in red on the left-hand side of the picture, and you get an idea of the landing area. See how difficult it is? They predicated this mission on it being sort of a sandy-type soil, and the regolith is actually quite rocky, so it's going to be a problem. And you get an idea of the size of the spacecraft and the scale of that picture from the shadow there, 6 meters across the solar panels. Close-up of that shadow. Quite a nice one. And this is one of the closest pictures taken so far of Ryugu. And this is the shape model for Ryugu. On to the Dawn mission. The Dawn mission is now finishing up, and the craft is being left in orbit around Ceres, but is now exhausted its fuel, and the science mission is ended. And this is one of the last pictures that came back and shows the salty deposits and evidence that water has at some stage been on the dwarf planet series in fairly recently in astronomical terms. Further evidence of geologic activity on Ceres is the slumping here. You can see a massive block has slid down the side of a crater. The Kepler mission has finished now, as I showed you in the movie, and this is an artist's impression of how it's found thousands and thousands of planets, and we now know that most stars have planets and most stars have more than one planet.
Current score's about 3,800.
Current score 3,800, thank you. Oh yes. The Juno mission, again, it's not a photographic mission, but the thing that grabs the attention is the Juno Cam, which is not officially operated by NASA, but the pictures are analysed by the public. And here's a picture, or a sequence of pictures, and that dot that you see on the left-hand side, descending down, apparently descending towards the planet, is actually the moon Io. So it won't ever get any close pictures of Io, but it will get a few. All right. That's a still of that, and you can see that's changed around, and you can see the moon Io on the right-hand side there. Some more Juno Cam pics. And yes, there's a Star Trek spaceship way out in the cosmos, but on Jupiter there is life. Certainly. Not the Carl Sagan sort, but actually of the marine variety. Can you see it there? The dolphin. For those who haven't spotted it yet, the dolphin. That's from Juno Cam as well on Jupiter. So a nice little dolphin shape there. Cassini. Although the mission is finished, the images keep coming in, reprocessing the images that are down on the ground, and some nice pictures coming up here. And we just finish up with a few more recent. That's Dione, taken through a green light filter, so it gives an unusual view of the moon Dione. And Titan, the centre part picture is how you'd see it with the visible eye, and these other ones are the VIMS, Visible Imaging Spectrometer, and shows various views of the moon. And there's a nice shot of the moon against the background of Saturn itself, and you can see the haze in the upper atmosphere there. Now, it's taken a series of pictures. Again, this is in infrared, sort of infrared light, yes, and it shows dust storms. The arrows are pointing towards dust storms that have been on Titan. Here's a little animation showing those dust storms. The dust storm lasts a few hours to just a few days, and that's all. So they've been very hard to capture. Okay. And, of course, New Horizons. Don't forget, we're counting down the weeks now to the flyby of Ultima Thule. And here's one of the first pictures that came back of Ultima Thule from the New Horizons spacecraft. Very difficult to photograph because it's against the background of a whole lot of stars. Some directions you look out and there's hardly any stars there. But unfortunately for New Horizons, the stars are right in the field of view. And so it's very hard to pick out Ultima Thule. And we're just on the last couple of pictures here now. It's using it for navigation. These pictures, they help to identify where the Kuiper Belt object is in relation to the stars and in relation to New Horizons. So that helps navigate to the flyby. And we'll pretty much finish up here with return back to our home planet, Earth. And of course you recognise that, don't you? Goss's Bluff. No? Okay, this is in Central Australia. That circular feature you see on the sort of leftish side of the picture is Gossip's Bluff. It's an asteroid impact. I've been there and actually took a series of panoramic photographs around inside it. The main crater itself is about 7 kilometres across, but the actual full measure of it is about 20 kilometres across. Over here you can see the McDonnell Ranges and other interesting features. So I think that's about it.
Thanks,
Thank you.
All right, well, that is it for this month's meeting. Thank you, everybody, for coming along. Thank you for everyone who's contributed. Michael Abdilla, who organises all the meetings. Actually, the audio-visual stuff, this is all of his gear. He gets here about an hour and a half before everyone else gets here, sets it all up, and does the live streaming and everything like that, so I really appreciate all his work there. Andrew does the radio show and also contributes here to the Space News, and Angelo and Igor, of course. So that's it. Once again, December 17 is our interview trivia night. Everyone's welcome. Bring a friend. Get online to the website and just register. It asks you to buy a ticket. It's free, but it just helps us to know who's coming along and how many people we have to work to cater for. Other than that, thanks so much. Have a great rest of your evening.